The Colorado Rockies in winter. Miles of silence. Miles of stone and pine and cold that does not apologize for itself. A single wagon on a mountain trail. 2 people. No town in sight. Then the pass opens, and below, impossible, undeniable, an entire world glows in the dark. Lamplight, smoke, the sound of machinery, where there should be nothing but wind. A 4-story granite fortress built into the living rock of the mountain itself, its windows burning amber against the night sky. A water wheel the size of a barn, turning in a river that should not exist at this altitude. Rail tracks running along the cliff face, like something from a fever dream. The young woman on the wagon seat does not gasp. She opens a small brown notebook, and she begins to write, because she already knew the man beside her was hiding something. She just did not know it was this. The number was $2,400. Imogen Dalby had written it so many times it had stopped looking like a number. It looked like a sentence now, like a verdict, like something that intended to stay. 30 days left on the note. She stood in the garden, what was left of the garden, with a spade in her hand, looking at 3 rows of turnips frozen solid in the ground 2 weeks before they were ready. November in Pine Ridge, Colorado. 1885. The real cold, not the pretty October kind, the kind that found every crack in the cabin walls and pushed through anyway. The kind that sat down in a room and refused to leave. 19 years old. Auburn hair pulled back with a piece of twine because she had run out of ribbon in September. She wrote in her notebook that morning. Just 3 words. Turnips. Gone. Again. The notebook was small. Brown leather cover gone soft at the corners from being carried in her coat pocket every day for 2 years. She had found it in the schoolhouse donation box when she was 17 and had been writing in it ever since. Numbers mostly. Prices, dates, the exact amount of flour left in the tin, the exact number of days before the next payment came due. Numbers were honest. Numbers did not make promises they could not keep. Inside the cabin, her father coughed. That cough. She knew every version of it by now. The morning cough that was just his lungs waking up. The afternoon cough that meant he had pushed himself too far again. And the night cough. The one she heard through the thin wall between their rooms. The one she lay awake listening to and counting the seconds between each one. Rufus Dalby had gone into the Ashwood No. 4 shaft 14 months ago as a healthy man of 43. He had come out on a stretcher with 3 broken ribs. One of them had not healed right. The company doctor had seen him twice. Then the company doctor had stopped coming. The bill had not stopped coming. The Ashwood Timber Company held the note. They had been generous about it, their letter said, very understanding. But the note would come due in 30 days, and there were no extensions available at this time. And they hoped she understood. She understood. She went inside and made cornmeal porridge with the last of the good cornmeal, and called her brother and sister in from wherever they had gotten to. 12 and 10. Still young enough to laugh at things. She protected that fiercely. The laughing. "Is there honey?" her sister asked. "There was honey yesterday," Imogen said. "So there's no honey." That's what I said. Her brother was already eating. He did not ask about honey. He was 12 and had learned which questions had good answers and which ones didn't. After breakfast, Imogen sat with her father. He looked smaller than he used to. That was the thing she could not get used to. Rufus Dalby had been the biggest man she knew. Not tall, just solid. The kind of solid that came from years of working underground, of moving stone with your body. Now he sat in the chair by the fire, and his shoulders curved inward, and his hands shook when he lifted his coffee cup. He looked at her with the eyes of a man who knew exactly what his daughter was carrying, and could not help her carry it. "Jerome Tarbell came by yesterday," he said. "I know. While you were at the laundry." "I know, Papa." He was quiet for a moment. The fire snapped. Outside, the wind found the loose board on the north side of the cabin and rattled it the way it did every morning, the way she kept meaning to fix it and kept not having time. "He is not a bad man," her father said, carefully, like he was reading from something he did not fully believe. Imogen looked at the fire. She did not say what she thought about Jerome Tarbell. She had written it in the notebook, in very small letters, very precise language. She had not shown that page to anyone. "He offered to take on the Ashwood note," her father said. "I know what he offered. Imogen, he wants the land, Papa, not me. He wants the land under the land. The way he kept looking at the east corner of the yard when he talked to you." She opened the notebook, turned to a page near the back. "I wrote down the mineral survey prices for this area. If there is a brine deposit under our property line, and I think there might be, it is worth more than 10 times what we owe." Her father stared at her. "How did you—" "The surveyor's report is public record. I read it at the county office." She closed the notebook. "Jerome Tarbell knows something about our land that we don't know yet. I am not going to sign anything that gives him access to it." Silence. Then her father coughed, long and rough, and the kind that made her put her hand on his back without thinking about it. Muscle memory. She had done it so many times her hand moved before she did. When it stopped, she handed him the water cup. He drank, looked at her over the rim with tired eyes. "Then what do we do?" She didn't answer right away, because she didn't have an answer yet. And she had learned a long time ago not to say things she didn't mean just to fill up silence. Silence was cheaper than a promise you couldn't keep. "I'm working on it," she said. Jerome Tarbell came himself the next morning. He arrived on a clean horse, wearing a clean coat, and the smile of a man who believed he already knew how the conversation was going to go. He had gray at his temples and careful eyes, and the kind of patience that came from never having needed to hurry. He sat across from her at the rough table, and he talked about the debt, about the impossibility of it, about how unfortunate the whole situation was, really, and how much he hated to see a family like hers struggling. He talked about his own property, its size, its comfort, the extra rooms. He talked about the children, how they needed stability, a proper roof, a proper school. He did not talk about love, which she appreciated, actually. It would have been insulting. "What I'm offering," he said with the practiced ease of a man who had said this before, "is a solution. Clean and simple, the debt disappears. Your family stays in this cabin as long as your father needs it. The children have everything they need." He paused. "All I need from you is a yes." Imogen had her notebook open on the table. She was writing while he talked. He noticed this, and his smile tightened slightly, but he did not stop talking. When he stopped, she looked up. "I have a question," she said. "Of course. Why the east corner?" He blinked. I'm sorry. When you came to see my father, you kept looking at the east corner of the yard, the far edge, past the old fence line." She tilted her head. "Why?" Something moved through his face, quick and then gone. "I wasn't aware I was looking at anything in particular," he said pleasantly. She wrote something in the notebook. "And what did you say to the county assayer last month? The one who came through on the 14th. The pleasant smile went a degree cooler. "I don't know what you're—" "His name is Elward Briggs," Imogen said. "He stayed 2 nights at the boarding house. Mrs. Pittuck mentioned you had dinner together. She mentioned it quite specifically because she said you picked up the bill, which she considered unusual for you." She closed the notebook. "I'm not going to marry you, Mr. Tarbell, and I am going to have the mineral rights to this property independently assessed before I sign anything with anyone, including Ashwood Timber Company." She stood up. "Thank you for coming by." He sat very still for a moment. Then he stood, put on his hat, moved toward the door. At the threshold he stopped, turned back. "You are a very smart girl," he said, not as a compliment. "I know," she said. He left. She sat back down and finished the sentence she had been writing. Then she turned to a new page and wrote, "Tarbell, East Corner. Briggs, the assayer. Find out who paid the survey fee." That evening the envelope arrived, small, no return address, handed to her by the neighbor's youngest boy, who said a woman in a blue coat had given him a coin to deliver it. He could not describe the woman beyond the coat. He was 6. Inside one folded piece of paper. "Don't sign anything Tarbell offers you. He doesn't want the land. He wants what's under it. No signature." Imogen read it twice. Then she put it inside the back cover of the notebook and pressed the cover closed. She stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the east corner of the yard. So, she was right. The question was who else knew it, and why they were warning her instead of just taking it themselves. Fletcher Ashwood came 2 days later. She almost missed him. She was behind the cabin splitting wood when she heard the sound of a horse stopping at the front. By the time she came around the side, with the axe still in her hand, he was already at the door. He was tall, broad, wearing a leather coat that had seen serious weather and canvas trousers with mud on the knees. Dark beard, dark hair that needed cutting. He had his hat in his hands, and he was talking to her father through the doorway with a voice that was low and unhurried, like a man who had learned that the fastest way to be heard was to never raise his voice. He turned when he heard her footsteps, blue eyes, calm and steady. He looked at the axe first and then at her face, and something shifted in his expression, not wariness, more like recognition, like he was confirming something he had already expected to see. "Miss Dalby," he said. "You have the advantage of me," she said. She did not put the axe down. "Fletcher Ashwood." He said it simply, like it was just information. "May I come in?" She looked at him. She looked at the horse. Good animal. Very good, actually. Better than a traveling miner would own. She noted this and said nothing. "Come in," she said. They sat at the table. Her father poured coffee. Her brother and sister had been sent outside. Before Imogen realized she had done it, just a look at them and a small tilt of her head toward the door, and they went because they understood her signals by now, the way sailors understood weather. Fletcher Ashwood wrapped his hands around the coffee cup and talked. He said he had land higher up in the range, steady work, a place of his own. He had heard about their situation, the Ashwood note, her father's injury, the deadline coming. He was not rich, he said, but he had enough to clear the debt and keep the family through the winter. In exchange, he was asking her to come with him as his wife. He said it plain. No flowers, no poetry, no talk about destiny or fate or how beautiful she was in the firelight. He looked directly at her and said what he was offering and what he was asking, and then he stopped talking. Her father said his name carefully, testing it. Fletcher Ashwood answered a few questions about the land, the altitude, the proximity to the nearest town, whether the trail was passable in deep winter. He answered each question precisely and added nothing extra. Then her father, with the shaking hands and the curved shoulders and the eyes full of something he was trying to hide, looked at his daughter. Imogen was writing in the notebook. She had been writing since approximately 1 minute into Fletcher Ashwood's proposal. He had noticed immediately and had kept talking without changing his pace or his tone, which was interesting. Most men would have asked her to put it away. Most men would have found it rude. He just talked and let her write. Now she looked up. "You said you've heard about our situation," she said. "From who?" "People talk." "They do?" She looked at him steadily. "But most of the people who know the specific terms of our Ashwood note aren't the kind of people who have casual conversations with a traveling miner." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. More like a door cracked open and then firmly closed. "I have connections," he said. "To the Ashwood Company." A pause. "I am familiar with their operation," he said. She wrote that down. "Why me?" she said. "There are women in Pine Ridge who would say yes to this more easily than I will." He looked at her for a long moment. "I watched you 3 weeks ago at Pittock's trading post," he said. "You were buying flour. The new price was up 11 cents from the month before. You didn't complain. You didn't argue emotionally. You took out a small book and you wrote down the price and the date, and you asked Pittock for a specific list of the last 8 months' prices, and you told him you'd be checking against the state records next time you were in town." He paused. "He gave you a discount." She had in fact gotten a 4-cent reduction on the new price. She had also written it in the notebook. "I need someone who sees clearly," Fletcher Ashwood said, "who doesn't mistake what a thing looks like for what a thing is, and who does not stop when it gets difficult." He set down the coffee cup. "I watched for 3 weeks. You are that person." Silence. Her father's hands were very still on the table. Imogen looked at this man with his mud-kneed trousers and his too good horse and his calm blue eyes, and a specific kind of stillness that came not from having nothing to say, but from choosing very deliberately what to say. She thought, "He is not what he says he is." She thought, "I know that. The question is whether what he actually is will hurt me or help me." She stood up. "I need until morning," she said. Fletcher Ashwood stood, put his hat back on. "I'll come at first light," he said. He left. Pine Ridge buzzed the way small communities buzzed when something interesting happened to someone who was not them. Imogen heard it when she went to collect water, when she passed the churchyard, when 2 women at the dry goods store went quiet in a way that announced itself when she came in. The mountain man from up the range. The poor girl the mountain man wanted. Did she know something was wrong with him? Did she know nobody had ever come down from wherever he claimed to live with an offer like that unless they were hiding something? She listened to all of it. She said nothing. Tarbell found her on the road home that afternoon. He pulled his horse alongside her and rode slowly, matching her walking pace, which she found aggressively rude and said nothing about. "You've met the Ashwood man," he said. "Yes." "You should be careful." Not a warning, a threat wearing the costume of a warning. Nobody knows anything about him. Nobody has been to wherever he says his land is. Nobody has seen proof of a single thing he claims. "Nobody has seen proof of a single thing you claim either," she said pleasantly. His jaw tightened. "I am a known quantity in this community." "You are," she agreed. She kept walking. "Good day, Mr. Tarbell." That night, she sat alone at the table after everyone was asleep. The candle was low. The fire was lower. The loose board on the north wall rattled in the wind, and she thought about fixing it, and then thought about the 30 days and the $2,400 and the way her father's hands had looked on the table that morning. She opened the notebook. She turned to a clean page. On the left side, she wrote, "Stay." Under it, 30 days. No money. Tarbell takes the land and whatever is under it. Papa in the poorhouse. Children split up or gone to charity. The East Corner and everything it might be worth in someone else's hands forever. On the right side, she wrote, "Go." Under it, unknown man, unknown place, unknown intentions. Everything I don't know. She stared at the 2 columns. Then she drew a line under the right column and wrote something else. He did not flinch when I wrote while he talked. He looked at me the way a person looks at something they have already decided they need. Not want. Need. There is a difference. Want goes away. Need does not. She closed the notebook. She sat in the dark and listened to her father breathe through the wall. Then she blew out the candle and went to bed. At first light, she was already dressed when Fletcher Ashwood rode up. She had 2 things with her: a canvas bag with everything she owned that was worth carrying, and the notebook in her coat pocket. Her father stood in the doorway. His eyes were wet. He was trying very hard not to let them be wet, and failing in the way of men who had spent their lives believing strong meant dry-eyed. She hugged him, long and tight. She felt how thin his shoulders had gotten under her arms, and she did not say anything about it. She kissed her brother on the top of his head. He was 12 and pretended to find this annoying. His face said otherwise. Her sister held her around the waist and would not let go for a full minute. "I'll write," Imogen said, "when I can get letters out." She did not promise everything would be fine. She had promised herself she would never make that promise. She climbed up onto the wagon seat. Fletcher Ashwood sat beside her with the reins loose in his hands. He looked at her once briefly to make sure she was settled. Then he clicked to the horses and the wagon rolled. The cabin got smaller, the bare garden, the loose board on the north side, the east corner she might never know the truth about. All of it shrinking behind her until it was just a shape against the gray Colorado sky. She faced forward. The first day was cold and quiet. The trail climbed steadily through pine forest, the trees getting taller and closer together the higher they went. Fletcher drove with an easy confidence that had nothing casual about it. Every turn he made was deliberate. Every time he slowed the horses, it was for a reason she could see if she was watching. She was always watching. She wrote in the notebook when the wagon was steady enough to write, descriptions mostly. The way the trail bent, the names of plants she recognized, the altitude changes she could feel in her lungs, numbers, distances, how long they traveled before stopping. He glanced at the notebook once. "What are you writing?" he asked. His voice was neutral, not invasive, just a question. "What I see," she said. He nodded and said nothing else. That night, they stopped beside a narrow creek. He built a fire in very few moves, the kind of efficiency that came from doing something thousands of times. Not learned recently, deeply learned, long learned. She made note of that too. They ate in near silence. Bread and dried meat she had packed. He had brought more than she expected, good quality too. Not trail rations. Actual food. She looked at the fire and said, "Tell me about the place we're going." He thought for a moment. "It is high," he said, "above most of the weather. There is a river that comes through the valley year-round. It does not freeze even in winter." He paused. "There are people there, 60 or so, families and workers." Another pause. "It is self-sufficient, has been for years." "Self-sufficient," she repeated. "Meaning what exactly?" "Meaning it does not depend on the towns below." She looked at him across the fire. "That is an unusual thing for a poor mountain man to have built," she said. The firelight was on his face. He looked back at her steadily, without flinching. "Yes," he said. "It is." And that was all. She lay awake that night under the canvas with the stars overhead and thought about those two words. Not a denial, not an explanation, just a confirmation. Yes, it is. The second day, the terrain changed. Rockier, steeper. The trees thinned at the edges and showed gray cliff faces beneath them. The air thinner. Each breath working slightly harder to accomplish the same thing. Fletcher was quieter on the second day. Or she thought he was, until she realized he was not quieter, he was paying more attention. His eyes moved across the ridgeline with the practiced sweep of someone checking things. Not sightseeing, monitoring. She reached into the bag of supplies he had loaded that morning to take inventory. Her hands moved over familiar shapes, cloth food rope. And then something unfamiliar. A folded paper, thick. She pulled it out carefully and unfolded one corner just enough to see what it was. A map, detailed, topographic, with markings in a technical shorthand she recognized from the surveyor's reports she had read at the county office. Elevation markers, water source notations, mineral survey annotations in two different colors of ink. This was not a poor man's map. This was a professional document, the kind that cost more than a month of wages to commission. She folded it back, placed it exactly where she had found it. Her heartbeat was entirely normal. She had decided before her hand touched the bag that if she found something she was not supposed to find, she would put it back and say nothing, because knowing she had found it was information she needed. And him not knowing she had found it was also information she needed. She closed the bag and sat with her hands in her lap and her face forward and watched the trail ahead of them climb. That afternoon, the third day, they reached the pass. Narrow. 2 walls of stone on either side, the trail squeezed between them, the sky above a band of pale winter blue. Fletcher drew the horses to a stop at the opening. He sat there with the reins in his hands and did not speak. She looked at him, at the way his shoulders had set, at the slight tension in his jaw, a man bracing for something, not terrain, something else. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No," he said. He stopped, started again. "The next part, it will look different than what I described." She waited. "Different? How?" He looked at her, and for the first time since he had sat at her father's table and laid out a proposal as plain and unhurried as the weather, he looked uncertain. "Different in a way that matters," he said. There are things I should have said." "There usually are," she said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he turned back to the horses. "I'll tell you everything," he said. "Tonight, when we are there, and you can decide what you want to do with the information." She said nothing. He clicked to the horses. The wagon rolled forward through the pass, stone walls on either side, the sound of hooves echoing off rock, the narrow sky above them going darker as the passage narrowed. And then the passage ended, and the world opened. Below them, far below, cupped in a valley so wide and so hidden, she would never have believed it existed. An hour's ride from Pine Ridge was light. Not just light, lights, dozens. Through dusk that was falling fast across the Colorado peaks, a valley glowed. Yellow light from windows. White light from something that might have been lanterns, but were too bright and too steady for lanterns. Smoke from chimneys rose in clean columns and was caught by the mountain wind and stretched thin across the darkening sky. And in the center of the valley, built directly into the rock face of the eastern cliff, not beside it, not near it, into it, rose 4 stories of pale granite, dark with age and moisture, and the permanence of stone that has decided it belongs exactly where it is. Broad windows caught the last light and sent it back amber. A wide terrace wrapped the second floor, and she could see, even from this distance, even in this light, that the stonework was not rough. It was precise. It was the work of people who had intended to be here for a very long time. And the valley itself. A river ran through the center of it, silver in the dusk, and beside the river a wheel turned. Not a small wheel. A great iron and timber wheel 12 feet across, driven by the current, and from it ran a line of mechanical connections she would need to be much closer to understand, but that she understood in principle, water power. Converted to something, running something. There were buildings along the river, what looked like a mill. Smaller structures in neat rows that might be housing. One building with windows larger than the others that might be, she squinted, yes, a school. And running along the valley's south slope, following the contour of the mountain, in a line of impossible precision rail. A narrow gauge track smaller than the Denver lines, but unmistakably rail. A small engine sat at rest on it, still giving off the last warmth of the day. There were people moving below, small figures in the lamplight, going between buildings, living. 60 of them, he had said. 60 people living in a hidden valley that no one in Pine Ridge had ever mentioned, that no map she had ever read had ever named, that sat one long day's ride from the town where she had grown up and had been invisible. She sat on the wagon seat in the last of the mountain light and looked at all of it. She looked for a long time. Then she opened the notebook. She began to write. Not numbers, not observations. Just what she was looking at. The exact shape of it. The exact fact of it. The lamps and the wheel and the rail line and the 4 stories of granite built into the cliff and the 60 people going about their lives in a valley that did not exist. Fletcher had not said a word since the pass. She could feel him beside her, feel that he was watching her write, feel whatever it was he felt watching her, not triumph, not satisfaction. Something more complicated than that, something that had tension in it. When she finished the page, she capped her pen. She looked at him. "Ashwood," she said. "Yes." "Your name is Ashwood." "Yes." "And the company that holds my father's note." She said it flat. No accusation yet, just laying out the facts in sequence. "Also named Ashwood." He did not look away. "Yes," he said. She looked back at the valley below, at the lights in the dusk, at the rail line running along the southern slope, at the wheel in the river turning with the current. She thought, "I have been delivered into the hands of the man who owns my father's debt. He told me his real name on the first day. He is waiting for me to put those 2 things together." She looked at him one more time. "You said you would explain everything tonight," she said. "I will. Then let's go," she said. "I want to see it up close." He clicked to the horses. The wagon started down the switchback trail into the valley, and the lights of Silver Hollow rose up around them like a world that had been waiting there for exactly as long as it needed to. The wagon rolled into Silver Hollow as the last light left the sky. Imogen had written 4 pages in the notebook during the descent down the switchback trail. She wrote while the wagon swayed. She wrote while the smell of wood smoke reached them first, then the sound of the river, then the sound of machinery, a low, rhythmic turning that she felt in her sternum before she understood what made it. The water wheel. Up close, it was enormous. The paddles were old hardwood worn silk smooth at the edges, and the river drove them with a force that made the whole structure shudder on its axis. From the wheel ran a series of shafts and belts that disappeared into the mill building beside it. She stared at it as they passed. She wrote wheel, river force, converted to what mill generator. Both Fletcher watched her write and said nothing, which she was beginning to understand was simply how he operated. He drove straight to the main building, the 4-story granite structure she had seen from the pass. Up close, it was different than she expected. Not cold. The stone was pale gray-brown, and it had been laid by someone who understood that a building and a mountain could either fight each other or agree with each other, and this one had been built to agree. It looked like it had grown there, like the mountain had decided on its own to become something habitable. A man came out to take the horses. He was somewhere in his 50s, weathered, careful-eyed, and when he looked at Imogen, he did not gawk. He nodded, like he had been told to expect her and had decided in advance what he thought about it. She would find out later his name was Holt. He had been at Silver Hollow for 11 years. He had outlasted 3 foremen and 2 of Eugenia Ashwood's attempts to have him replaced. She liked him immediately and wrote his name down. Inside, the entry hall was stone and timber, and warm, very warm. A fireplace at the far end the size of a small room. She stopped in the middle of the hall and looked at the ceiling high with rough-hewn beams and lanterns hung on chains that burned steadily without the flicker of oil. She looked at them for a long moment. Gas, she thought. They were running gas in here. She wrote lighting, gas system, source. Fletcher stood to her side and watched her take inventory of his home with her small brown notebook and her pen, and made no move to stop her or redirect her or suggest that perhaps she should first sit down and have some tea. She appreciated that more than he would ever know. A woman brought food, hot soup, bread still warm. Imogen ate at the long kitchen table while Fletcher sat across from her and finally began to explain. His name was Fletcher Ashwood. His father had been Thomas Ashwood, founder of Ashwood Timber Company. Thomas had built Silver Hollow 30 years ago as a base of operations for the high country logging work. Over decades it had grown the mill, the housing, the school, the medical station, the rail line that ran along the south slope to move timber and supplies. When Thomas died 4 years ago, Fletcher had inherited everything: the company, the valley, the debt portfolio, including, she noted, the note on the Dalby property. He said this last part plainly, not defensively, like he had decided to say it straight and let her react however she was going to react. She looked at her soup. "Tell me about my father's debt," she said. Fletcher put down his bread. He told her. The original loan had been $1,800 at a reasonable rate. The paperwork was clean, or had looked clean. But buried in the fine print was an escalation clause that activated automatically if any payment was late by more than 15 days. The first time Rufus Dalby had been late February, 6 months after the mine accident. When they were eating the last of the winter stores, the rate had jumped. Not by the amount stated in the main text, by the amount buried in the clause on page 4. The debt had not grown from $1,800 to $2,400 through ordinary interest. It had been pushed there. Imogen was writing the whole time he talked. When he finished, she read back through what she had written. 3 pages of careful notes. She turned to a fresh page and drew a line down the middle. Left side, what he has said. Right side, what remains to be verified. Who writes these contracts? She said. The company's legal team, which currently reports to my aunt Eugenia Ashwood. She oversees the business operations. And she wrote the escalation clause. Not a question. I believe so, Fletcher said. Yes. Imogen looked at him across the table. Did you know, she said, when you came to Pine Ridge, did you know the clause was in the contract? He met her eyes. I knew the debt was larger than it should have been, he said. I did not know the full mechanism until I reviewed the file myself 3 months ago. 3 months ago, which was when he had started watching her at Pittuck's trading post. She wrote timeline. 3 months. He investigated before proposing. Why investigate before proposing unless the proposal was the response to what he found? She closed the notebook. Good night, she said. He blinked. Good. I need to think. She stood. Where is the room? He showed her. She went to sleep with the notebook pressed against her chest and the sound of the river moving in the dark below. The next morning she got up before anyone else. She walked Silver Hollow the way she had walked Pine Ridge, methodically. Room by room, building by building. Starting with what was closest and working outward. The main house first, 4 stories. The ground floor was working space kitchen storerooms. The company office, with its locked filing cabinets and its unlocked bookshelves. She looked at the books, logging manuals, legal volumes, land survey reports, and on the bottom shelf, tucked behind a heavy volume on Colorado mining law, a dog-eared agricultural text that someone had read hard and often. She pulled it out, flipped to the most marked section, Sustainable Timber Management in High-Altitude Environments, margin notes in pencil. A man's handwriting, questions mostly. What does this mean in practice? Can this be implemented without shutting down operations? What would this cost over 3 years versus 10? She put it back exactly where she found it. The mill next. The man running it broad, methodical, who looked at her notebook and grinned, was named Prentice. He had been here 9 years. He showed her the wheel mechanism without being asked, which meant he had been told to expect someone who would want to understand it. River force to shaft rotation, to drive belt to millstone. Simple in principle, precise in execution. She asked about maintenance schedules, and he rattled them off from memory. She asked about the gas lines, and he explained the source, a natural seam in the eastern cliff face piped in. She wrote for 20 minutes. Then she went to the school. One room. One teacher, a young woman named Miss Pratt, who was 23 and had come up from Denver 2 years ago for reasons she kept vague. The school ran Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Imogen looked at the attendance board. 22 children registered. Average attendance on school days, 14. She asked Miss Pratt why. Miss Pratt said the others are needed at home on those days. Their parents work 6 days and the children help. Imogen wrote this down. That afternoon, she found Fletcher in the company office and sat across from him and put the notebook on the desk between them. She asked about wages. He told her. She asked whether wages had been adjusted in the last 2 years. He said not since his father's time. She asked about the accident rate in the mine. He went to the filing cabinet and got her the numbers himself and sat down and looked at them with her. The numbers were not good. She pointed out that 2 of the 3 recorded accidents had occurred on the early morning shift. She asked what was different about that shift. He said the lighting was older in the lower section. The gas lines had not been extended there yet. She wrote lighting deficit in lower section. Correlation with accident timing. Cost to extend gas line versus cost of lost productivity from injuries. He watched her write. That math, he said slowly, is something I should have done 6 months ago. Yes, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he went to the door and called for Holt. When Holt came in, Fletcher told him he wanted the gas line extension prioritized. Beginning next week, he wanted a full safety review of the lower section before any shift entered it again. Holt looked at Imogen. Imogen looked at her notebook. Yes, sir, Holt said with something in his voice that was not exactly approval because that was not his place, but was very close to it. This was how the first week went, not romance, not warmth exactly. More like 2 people discovering they could stand in the same room and both be useful at the same time. She reorganized the school schedule 4 days instead of 3 with a rotation, so no family needed to keep children home for working reasons 2 days in a row. Miss Pratt looked at the schedule and said she would have done this herself if anyone had asked her. Imogen said, I know. She wrote a note for Fletcher suggesting he ask his staff for operational ideas quarterly. Fletcher read the note, read it again, then implemented it. She showed him the agricultural text from the bottom shelf. "You've read this," she said. "Parts of it. The margin notes are in your handwriting." He looked at her levelly. "You have a very good memory." "I do." She put the book on the desk. "There is a method here for graduated clear-cutting. You take the oldest growth in sections, leave corridors, replant at the edges. Longer cycle, less disruption to the slope. The initial yields are lower, but the land recovers. In 20 years, you have more working forest, not less." He looked at the book, then at her. "The board has been pushing for expanded operations," he said. "More acres cleared per season." "The board is looking at 5 years," she said. "This is a 50-year question." He was quiet. She left the book on his desk and went back to the school. That night there was an early snow, not heavy, just the first kind, the reminder the mountains saying, "I know you are here, and I know what's coming." She stood on the second-floor terrace, wrapped in a borrowed shawl, and looked at the valley below, going white and quiet under the flakes. She heard footsteps. Fletcher stood beside her. They were quiet together. She was starting to understand his silences. They were not unfriendly. They were just occupied. He was thinking in them, the same way she was always thinking in hers. "Why the school?" she said. "Most operations like this don't run one." "My father started it," he said. "He believed the children should have a chance at something different, not just follow their fathers into the mine." He paused. "I kept it. You expanded it." "I hired Miss Pratt, yes." She looked at the snow. "The 3-day schedule wasn't your idea," she said. "That was a budget constraint." "Yes." "I'm fixing it." "I know. I've seen the new rotation." Silence again. The snow fell soft and steady. She thought, "This is not what I expected, and that is interesting." She went inside before she could think anything else. Eugenia Ashwood arrived on a Thursday. 2 carriages, 4 horses each, more luggage than an army needed. A woman in her mid-50s who moved through the world the way glaciers moved through mountains, slowly, unstoppably, and with the assumption that everything in her path would eventually yield. She was beautiful. That was the first thing. Not the kind of beautiful that asked for your attention, the kind that simply had it. White hair, not gray, properly. White worn in an immaculate arrangement that must have taken an hour every morning. Gray eyes with a sharpness in them that had nothing to do with malice. Or at least, not yet. She stepped out of the carriage and looked at Silver Hollow the way a woman looked at her own possessions, with the proprietary satisfaction of someone surveying what was hers. Behind her came 2 men in city suits, and behind them, stepping down from the second carriage with her gloved hands clasped before her and her eyes cast carefully downward, a young woman in a dark blue traveling dress, 22 years old, maybe 23. Brown hair, fine-boned, the kind of face that was currently being studied very hard at being expressionless. Sylvie Haig. Imogen noted the name and the face and the careful blankness of it and wrote nothing. Sometimes things needed to be held in the mind first before they could be written down. Eugenia came inside and greeted Fletcher with the warmth of a woman who loved someone she also planned to use. Then she turned to Imogen. Gray eyes, quick and complete. Up, down, not rude, not theatrical. The kind of assessment a woman made in 1 second that added up to a full verdict and showed nothing of what the verdict was. "A surprise," Eugenia said, pleasantly, lightly, like she was commenting on the weather. "Mrs. Ashwood," Imogen said. "Miss Dalby." She looked at the notebook in Imogen's hands. "I see you've been keeping busy." "I have," and that was all. Eugenia moved on to speaking with one of the suited men about something relating to contract delivery schedules. She did not look at Imogen again for the rest of the afternoon, which was, Imogen understood, its own kind of attack. They had tea that evening. Eugenia arranged this. A delicate table in the sitting room. Thin cups, a display of small cakes that had somehow materialized from the kitchen within an hour of the carriage's arrival. Eugenia talked about the company, about the expansion plans, about the investors in Denver who were very interested, very serious, and who had been waiting for a resolution of certain internal matters before committing capital. She talked for 45 minutes, without once addressing Imogen directly. Not once. It was extraordinary, actually. Imogen had never seen it done so perfectly. To be in a room with someone and discuss the room, the future of the room, the fate of everything connected to the room, and leave one person in the room entirely outside of it. Imogen sipped her tea. She wrote 3 sentences in the notebook under the table. "Eugenia is not ignoring me. She is demonstrating something. The demonstration is this is what my life will look like if I stay." Then she capped her pen, and she looked at Eugenia Ashwood and waited. The notebook was on the river railing the next morning. Imogen had gone in for breakfast before she realized she had left it outside. She came back to get it and found Sylvie Haig standing at the railing, holding the notebook loosely in both hands, not reading it, or rather not actively reading it, but looking at a page that had fallen open. She looked up when she heard Imogen's step. She held the notebook out immediately. No hesitation. No performance of having done nothing wrong. "The wind opened it," she said. "I didn't want it to fall into the river." Imogen took it. She looked at the page that was visible. Numbers, wage calculations, a comparison she had made between silver, Hollow's current pay scale, and the regional average. "Those are wages," Sylvie said quietly. "Yes." "You're comparing them to something. County records." Imogen closed the notebook. She looked at Sylvie Haig's careful face, at the brown eyes that had something in them she recognized. Not fear, something more complicated than fear. "What do you need?" Sylvie blinked. "I'm sorry." "You came to find the notebook," Imogen said. "You didn't come because of the notebook. What do you need?" A long silence. The river moved below them. The great wheel turned with its steady, wet percussion. Somewhere in the mill, Prentice was already working. She could hear the machinery running. Sylvie Haig said, "I think you already know what I need." "I know who sent the letter," Imogen said. "I matched the handwriting when I saw your signature on the luggage tag yesterday." Something in Sylvie went very still. "You kept it quiet," she said. "I keep a lot of things quiet until I understand them." Imogen leaned on the railing beside her, not facing her, both of them looking at the river. "Tell me about your father." Sylvie was quiet for a long time. Then she told her. Edmund Haig had been a merchant in Denver. Not wealthy, but established. He had a reputation for fairness in a city where that was rarer than people liked to admit. He had done business with the Ashwood Company for years. Small contracts, steady, reliable. And then Eugenia had come to him with a larger opportunity, a distribution agreement for Ashwood timber into the mountain settlements. A partnership. He had signed. What he had signed was not what he had been told he was signing. The contract that Edmund Haig put his name to had a provision buried in the third addendum, a provision about liability in the event of supply disruptions. 2 years later, there was a supply disruption. Not unusual, weather equipment failure. But the liability clause activated, and Edmund Haig found himself responsible for losses he had not caused and could not pay. He had spent the last 18 months of his life trying to understand how he had been outmaneuvered. He had died in March, still not certain. He wasn't a stupid man, Sylvie said. Her voice was flat, not tearful. She had moved past the tearful stage a long time ago. He just trusted that a contract meant what it said it meant. In plain language, he did not think to read the addendum. Imogen was quiet. He died with debt attached to his name, Sylvie said. And shame, and that is what I cannot. She stopped, pressed her lips together. My family's name has a stain on it that doesn't belong there. He made an error. That is different from being dishonest, and the distinction has been erased. Imogen looked at the water moving below. Why did you warn me about Tarbell? Because I recognized the pattern, Sylvie said simply. A person made vulnerable by debt, a predator who knew about the vulnerability before the person did, an offer designed to appear like rescue. She paused. I didn't want to watch it happen to someone else. And Eugenia's plan, Imogen said. She intended to use my family's debt to pressure me. She was going to come to you herself, Sylvie said. Offer to forgive the debt in exchange for your advocacy with Fletcher, for your support in convincing him to marry. She stopped. You, Imogen said. Me, Sylvie said, without feeling. I am the appropriate choice by her reckoning. My father's name is respectable enough for Denver, and I owe her a debt of my own that she has been collecting on for some time now. She finally looked at Imogen directly. I am not your enemy. I know, Imogen said. I am also not your friend. I know that too. Imogen looked back at her. You are a person in a bad situation who made one decent choice and then came here to see how it landed. She pushed off the railing. That's enough for now. She went inside. She went directly to Fletcher's office. She closed the door behind her. He looked up from the papers on his desk. She did not sit down. She said, Tell me everything, starting with when you found out about the escalation clause in my father's contract, and ending with why you came to Pine Ridge specifically for me. He put down his pen. He told her, the escalation clause. 3 months ago, he had been reviewing the debt portfolio, all of it, the full company ledger that Eugenia usually managed, which she had briefly left accessible when she traveled to San Francisco, and he had found 7 contracts with similar language. 7 families in the mountain settlements carrying debt that was larger than it should have been. The Dalby note was the highest, and the deadline was the closest. He had investigated her specifically because she was the most urgent case. And then he had stayed watching because of what he saw. The trading post, the way she talked to Pittock, the way she shielded her brother and sister from the exchange, The way she looked at the account book the store kept visible on the counter and read it upside down while Pituk was distracted and wrote something in her notebook and did not tell him what she had written. He had come back 4 more times after that. "I needed a partner," he said. "Not a wife in the social sense, a partner. Someone who could see what was happening in this operation and help me fix it before Eugenia completes what she is trying to build." "Which is what?" Imogen said. "Specifically, control of the board. My father's will had a clause. If I married without board approval within 5 years of his death, 51% of the voting shares pass to the board majority, which Eugenia controls." He paused. "I have 8 weeks left in that 5-year window. If I am married before the window closes without board approval, she challenges the marriage and the shares transfer. So marrying me starts the clock on her challenge," he said. "Yes, I knew that." Silence. "And you came to me anyway," she said. "I came to you because you are the only person I found who would not be overwhelmed by what she is going to bring against us." He looked at her directly. "And because your family's debt is partly my fault, not personally, but my company, my name, and I could not leave that as it was." Imogen stood very still. He used her. That part was true. He also chose her. That part was also true. Both things were sitting in the same room, and she had to decide what to do with that. She went to the door. "I need 3 days," she said. "Imogen, 3 days," she said. "Don't talk to me." She left. She did not speak to him for 3 days, which was more difficult than she had expected, because Silver Hollow was not that large, and she ran into him twice in the hall, and once by the river. Each time she looked through him in a way that she was fairly certain was very difficult to be looked through, and kept walking. She was not idle during those 3 days. Fletcher had left the company office unlocked. She did not know if this was intentional. She decided to operate as if it was, and proceeded accordingly. She read everything. The complete ledger. The 7 debt contracts with escalation clauses she found all 7 mapped the victims, compared the original amounts to the inflated totals. She found the correspondence between Eugenia and the company legal team, not all of it, but enough. She found the draft of an agreement that had not yet been signed, a development contract with a Denver investment group that proposed clearing 1,500 acres of high country forest without the state logging survey required by Colorado law. She found this, and she put it back where she found it, and she sat very quietly at the desk for several minutes. There it is. That is the lever. Now I understand what kind of fight this actually is. On the 3rd evening, Eugenia called them all to dinner, a formal dinner. The suited lawyers had been waiting for 3 days, and they radiated the impatience of men who billed by the hour. Eugenia sat at the head of the table and smiled, and the smile had changed. She announced that the governor of Colorado was holding a reception in Denver in 2 weeks. Every significant investor, judge, and official in the state would be in attendance. Eugenia intended to present the board's formal challenge to Fletcher's marriage at that reception, publicly, before the governor and the assembled witnesses. The inheritance clause was clear, she said. The marriage lacked the required approval. The challenge would be filed with the appropriate courts, and in the interim, she would be seeking a temporary transfer of board authority. She looked at Imogen. The first time she had looked at her directly, in 3 days. I say this in front of you, Eugenia said, because I believe you are an intelligent woman, and intelligent women understand when the numbers do not favor them. She paused. If you care about Fletcher's future, about this valley's future, you will understand that stepping back gracefully now is the kindest thing you can do. The table was very quiet. Fletcher's jaw had gone tight. Imogen could see it from her seat. The lawyers were looking at their plates. Sylvie Haig was looking at the window. Imogen looked at Eugenia Ashwood, at the gray eyes, at the immaculate white hair and the careful smile, and the diamond brooch at her collar that probably cost more than the Dalby cabin. She has been doing this her whole life. She is very good at it. She has never once in her life sat across from someone who read every document in the filing cabinet before they came to dinner. Imogen picked up her fork. "I'll be in Denver," she said. "Thank you for the notice." And she ate her soup. Eugenia's smile did not change, but something in her eyes recalculated, a small, quick movement, like a door closing on a room she had not expected to find occupied. After dinner, Imogen went upstairs to her room. She sat at the desk with the notebook, and she turned to a fresh page, and she wrote for 2 hours. Not grievances, not feelings, numbers, clauses, dates, the timeline of the escalation contracts, the acreage figures in the unsigned development deal, the name of the Denver Investment Group, and what she could find about their connections in the state legislature, the specific section of Colorado law regarding logging surveys, and what the penalties were for commencing operations without one. She wrote until her hand ached. Then she set down the pen and looked at what she had written. The notebook was almost full now. She had started it at 17 with nothing but prices and flour amounts. Now the last 20 pages held something that looked considerably more like a case. 2 weeks. She had been poor her whole life, and she had still found a way to read everything. She blew out the candle. Outside the window, the river carried the sound of moving water down the valley, and the stars above Silver Hollow burned cold and very far away, and she fell asleep thinking about the things she had not yet found, and where in that office they might be hiding. The train to Denver left at 6 in the morning. Imogen was on the platform at 5:40 with her canvas bag and her coat and the notebook in her left coat pocket and the documents she had copied by hand from Fletcher's filing cabinet folded carefully in her right, not stolen, copied by hand, between 2 and 4 in the morning over the course of 3 nights. She had returned every original to its exact location with the same attention she gave to everything. The documents in her pocket were in her handwriting, not Eugenia's legal team's, which made them her observations rather than company property. She had thought about this distinction carefully before she started copying. Fletcher was already there. He stood at the far end of the platform with his hands in his coat and the expression of a man who had spent 2 weeks being looked through and was still not certain if he deserved it. He looked at her when she arrived. She looked back. She walked to a different part of the platform. Not cruelty, logistics. She needed to think, not manage his feelings about her thinking. Sylvie Haig arrived at 5:52, alone. She had a single bag and the careful, expressionless face, and she stood for a moment on the platform, looking at the train as if deciding something. Then she walked to where Imogen stood. "May I travel in your car?" she said. "Yes," Imogen said. They did not speak again until the train was moving, and Pine Ridge and Silver Hollow were both behind them, and the Colorado mountains were sliding past the window in their winter gray, and the heater in the car was doing something that was not quite adequate, but was better than the platform. Sylvie looked at the window. Imogen looked at the notebook. Then Sylvie said, "My father's name was Edmund." Imogen looked up. "He used to whistle while he worked," Sylvie said, still looking at the window. "Not songs exactly, just sound. A sound he made when he was thinking. I never knew I memorized it until after he was gone, and I found myself listening for it in rooms he had never been in." She paused. "He died believing he had destroyed our family." "He didn't destroy it," Imogen said. "I know that." Her voice was flat. Not cold, just scraped clean of anything extra. "The people who destroyed it are still in business. That is what I am." She stopped. "I am not doing this for you. I need you to understand that." "I do understand that." "I am doing this because I am tired of watching his name carry something that isn't his." Imogen closed the notebook. She looked at Sylvie Haig's profile against the winter window, at the fine-boned jaw set hard, at the eyes watching something nobody else in the car could see. She had been carrying this for a year. She came all the way to Silver Hollow on Eugenia's arm carrying it. That was a kind of strength that didn't get written about much. "I have the contract your father signed," Imogen said. Sylvie turned. "I have the original distribution agreement," Imogen said. "And the third addendum. I copied them by hand from the filing cabinet 3 nights ago. I also have the correspondence between Eugenia and the legal team dated 3 months before your father signed in, which she directs them to draft the liability clause in language that, and I'm quoting directly, will not be apparent on first review." Silence. The train rattled over a switch, and the window shook. "She planned it," Sylvie said. Not a question. She already knew. But there was a difference between knowing and seeing the written evidence, and the difference moved through her face. "From the beginning," Imogen said. Sylvie was quiet for a long time. "I have letters," she said, finally, "between Eugenia and my father after he signed." She continued to write him. Friendly letters, advising him on the business, pretending the liability hadn't triggered, until it did. She looked at her hands. He saved them. All of them. He was the kind of man who saved things in case he needed them later. She looked at Imogen. "I have them with me," she said. Imogen looked at her for a long moment. "Good," she said. She opened the notebook to a fresh page. "Tell me everything in them," she said. "I need to know what we have before we walk in the door tonight." Sylvie told her for 2 hours. While the mountains flattened into foothills, and the foothills spread into the plains, and Denver grew larger through the window from a smudge of smoke to a city. She told her everything. And Imogen wrote fast and precise, asking questions when something needed clarification, never once saying "I'm sorry" or "how awful," because Sylvie Haig did not need that. She needed someone to listen carefully and write things down correctly, which Imogen could do. Denver in December smelled like coal smoke and the mud of a city that was growing faster than its drainage could handle. They arrived in the afternoon. Eugenia had arranged the hotel, a grand one, with a carved stone arch and gas lights burning in the lobby. Imogen looked at the lobby and thought of the gas lines at Silver Hollow and felt briefly homesick for the sound of the river, which surprised her. She put the thought away and went upstairs. She had 4 hours. She used 3 of them at the desk in her room, reorganizing everything she had written into a sequence. Not a speech, a map, a route through a room full of obstacles that she had never been in, leading to a destination she intended to reach. She had never done this before. Nobody does something for the first time after they have practiced it. Good thing she read fast. At the end of the 3rd hour, Fletcher knocked on her door. She opened it. He stood in the hall in his good black coat, looking like a man who had been thinking hard for 2 weeks and had arrived at something he needed to say. "Imogen, are you ready for tonight?" He blinked. Yes, I wanted to. I need you to do one thing," she said. "What thing?" "If something goes wrong in that room, if I make a mistake, if I miss something, if it turns, I need you to not step in." He stared at her. "I need you to stand still," she said, "and let me work. Can you do that?" He was quiet for a long moment. "You don't trust me to help." "I trust you exactly as much as you've earned," she said, "which is not nothing. But this is my fight, and I need to fight it myself, or it doesn't mean anything." She looked at him steadily. "Can you stand still?" He looked back at her. A long look. The kind that was actually looking, not the kind that was deciding how to respond. "Yes," he said. "Good." She started to close the door. "And Fletcher?" "Yes. The coat is better than the canvas trousers." She closed the door. She heard him make a sound in the hall that might have been a laugh, or might have been something else. She didn't have time to determine which. She put on the dress. It was the one she had brought from Pine Ridge, dark green, not silk, good wool mended twice at the left hem, where she had caught it on a fence post 2 winters ago. She had not asked Eugenia for a new dress. She had looked at the offer when it was made, implicit, unspoken, in the way Eugenia looked at her clothing, and she had decided no, because she already knew what she was. She did not need a new dress to go be it. She put the notebook in her left pocket, the folded documents in her right. She looked at herself in the mirror, above the dresser. 19 years old. Pine Ridge, Colorado. 3 days of horseback and 1 week of reading filing cabinets and 2 hours of train notes. Eugenia Ashwood had been doing this for 30 years. She had also been doing it to people who didn't know what she was doing. That advantage ended tonight. The governor's reception was held in the banquet hall of the Windsor Hotel, which was large enough to make the silver hollow great room look modest. Chandeliers, dark wood paneling, a string quartet in the corner playing something that nobody was listening to. Men in suits of a quality that announced themselves. Women in silk in colors that had names Imogen didn't know. She walked in on Fletcher's arm, not because she needed his arm, because she needed his name to get past the door, and the door required an arm, so here was an arm. She was practical about these things. The room turned when they entered. Not all of it, not obviously. But the turn happened. She felt it. The subtle reorientation of attention that a large room made when something unexpected arrived. Fletcher Ashwood, in his good black coat, with a young woman in a dark green wool dress and a small brown notebook visible in her coat pocket. Not what they expected. Good. She did not want to be what they expected. Eugenia was already there. Of course she was. Gray silk tonight, diamond brooch, the kind of smile she wore in public that had nothing to do with pleasure. She crossed the room to them, and her eyes moved over Imogen's dress and the notebook in one fluid glance, and the smile did not change at all, which meant she had noticed and filed it and was deciding what it meant. "Miss Dalby," she said, "I'm glad you came." "I said I would," Imogen said. "Yes, a beat. You did." The men arrived, 3 of them who had been waiting for this evening, investors with interests in the high country timber development, who had been promised certain things and were waiting to see if those things would materialize. They greeted Fletcher with handshakes that lingered. They looked at Imogen with the look of men assessing something they don't quite know the category of. One of them, the tallest with silver at his temples, and the practiced pleasantness of a man who had learned long ago that he could afford to seem pleasant, introduced himself as Aldous Crane. He made a small joke about the mountain air, and then with the ease of someone changing gears, without clutch, asked Imogen if she had any thoughts on the new development proposals. He was told to draw me out. He was told I might be a complication. He is correct. I do have thoughts, she said. The proposed clear-cut acreage on the eastern slope above the watershed line, 1,500 acres. Crane's pleasant look remained exactly pleasant. You're familiar with the proposal. I read the draft agreement. She looked at him steadily. The Colorado logging survey requirement, the one established by the state legislature in 1882, requiring survey certification before any operation exceeding 1,000 acres, commences that survey hasn't been filed for this project. A small silence. Surveys take time, Crane said. The project timeline. The project timeline begins before the survey, she said. That's not a schedule problem. That's a legal problem. She tilted her head. Unless the plan is to begin before the survey is filed and address the compliance issue afterward. Another small silence, different quality. Miss Dalby. Crane's pleasant look finally shifted, not to hostility, to attention, real attention, the kind that had stopped performing. Where did you read this draft? In the company files, she said. I have a copy. She patted her right pocket. He looked at the pocket. He looked at her. He looked at the pocket again. She had the impression that Aldous Crane, who had been having conversations like this for decades, and winning most of them, was for the first time in recent memory unsure how to proceed. If you'll excuse me, he said. He went directly to Eugenia. Imogen watched them, Crane talking low and fast, Eugenia listening without expression. Her eyes moved once briefly to where Imogen stood, and something in them changed, not fear. Eugenia Ashwood was too disciplined for anything as unguarded as fear. Recalculation, that was the right word. Fletcher appeared at Imogen's side. What did you say to him? He said quietly. The truth, she said, in specific terms. Eugenia is going to move faster now. I know. She did not look at him. Are you standing still? A pause. I am standing very still, he said. Good. The governor arrived at 8 o'clock, a compact man with steady eyes and a bearing that came from learning to seem unhurried in rooms full of people who wanted things from him. He greeted Fletcher with the warmth of prior acquaintance. He looked at Imogen and asked without preamble who she was. She told him. She told him her name, her family's history. With the mine, the injury that had led to the debt, and without pause continued directly into what she had been doing at Silver Hollow for the past 3 weeks. The school schedule, the gas line extension, the wage analysis she had begun, the sustainability timber reading she had found on Fletcher's bottom shelf, and the conversation it had started about long cycle logging versus the current approach. He listened. He was not a man who listened to everyone. She could see that. He was a man who had learned to allocate his attention and was deciding quickly whether she warranted more of it. He decided she did. "Tell me more about the watershed concern," he said. She told him. She was in the middle of explaining the relationship between clear-cut acreage and the spring runoff patterns she had read about in the county survey when Eugenia arrived at the edge of their circle with one of the lawyers and the judge. He was an older man with a worn leather folder. She had noticed him earlier sitting with Eugenia's group, drinking very little and watching a great deal. Eugenia's smile had returned, fresh. "Governor," she said warmly, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there is a legal matter that requires your attention this evening." She nodded to the lawyer. "We have a brief filing." The lawyer opened the folder. He read, "The clause from Thomas Ashwood's will, the 5-year marriage requirement, the board approval provision, the filing date and the window remaining, the formal notice of the board's intent to challenge the union of Fletcher Ashwood and Imogen Dalby as non-compliant with the terms of the inheritance." The room had gotten quieter in the way rooms got quiet when something was happening that everyone could sense, but only some people understood. Imogen stood very still. "Here it is. Here is the room she prepared for. Stop thinking and start working." The judge finished reading. He looked at Fletcher. He looked at Imogen. He said with the precise diction of a man who had delivered difficult news in public rooms before that in his assessment the marriage lacked the requisite board approval and that pending formal review he would recommend a temporary hold on the inheritance transfer. The room was very quiet. Fletcher's jaw had tightened. She could see it without looking at him directly. The lawyer began to close the folder. "May I see the document?" Imogen said. The room stilled further. The lawyer paused. He looked at Eugenia. Eugenia looked at Imogen. Something passed through her gray eyes' assessment calculation, and then a thin decision that said, "Let her look, it won't help." The lawyer handed Imogen the folder. She read. She read slowly, not performing slowness, actually reading. Every line, every subordinate clause. The room waited. She was aware of the room waiting. She set that awareness aside and kept reading. She found it on the 3rd page. Section 4, paragraph 2, subsection C. Notwithstanding the approval requirement set forth in subsection A marriage shall be deemed compliant with the terms of this instrument if the married party can demonstrate to the satisfaction of the state that said marriage has produced material benefit to the community and region served by the company's operations as evidenced by formal recognition from relevant state authority. Material benefit, state recognition. She read it twice to be certain she was reading it correctly. And she was. She was reading it exactly correctly. She closed the folder. She handed it back to the lawyer. She turned to the governor. "Governor," she said, "I have a question." He looked at her, the unhurried eyes. "Does the state of Colorado have a formal mechanism for recognizing individuals who provide advisory service to the governor's office on matters of regional industry and land management. A pause. He was a careful man, which meant he understood what was being asked before she finished asking it. "We do," he said slowly. "And would such a recognition constitute a formal state acknowledgement in a legal sense?" Another pause. "It would," he said. The judge, who was looking at the folder again, said, "The instrument does specify." "Subsection C," Imogen said. She did not look at the judge. She looked at the governor. "Formal recognition from relevant state authority. Governor of the state of Colorado seems relevant." The room had stopped pretending to have other conversations. The governor looked at her for a long moment. He looked at Fletcher. He looked at Eugenia, whose expression had gone very smooth, in the way of things that are controlled very hard from the inside. "Miss Dalby," the governor said, "I have been listening to you for 20 minutes describe land management practices that I have been asking my own surveyors about for 2 years without getting a straight answer." He paused. "The state does maintain an advisory board on high country industry. The seat has been vacant for 8 months. I have been looking for someone with practical knowledge of both the territory and the business operations in it." He looked at her steadily. "Would you consider the appointment?" The room made a sound, not a loud sound, the kind that a room made when 30 people all moved slightly at the same moment. "Say yes." Say it before he reconsiders. Also before Eugenia does something. "Yes," she said. A secretary appeared from somewhere. He must have been at the edge of the room with a short letter on official paper. The governor's seal at the top. A line for a name. A line for a signature. The secretary handed it to her. She picked up the pen. Her hand was not entirely steady. She noted this and tightened her grip. She signed her name. Imogen Dalby. In careful letters, the judge took the document when she was done. He read it. He read the will clause again. He said with measurably less authority than before. In light of this development, the challenge would appear to be... He cleared his throat. "Complicated." "Section 4, paragraph 2, subsection C," Imogen said helpfully. He looked at her over the top of the document. "Yes," he said. "Subsection C." He closed the folder. Eugenia Ashwood had not moved. She stood 3 feet from the governor with her diamond brooch and her gray silk, and her expression of total control, and the control was perfect. Absolutely perfect. No one looking at her face could have said she felt anything at all, except her right hand. Her right hand at her side had closed into a fist. Imogen saw it, and that was when Sylvie Haig walked across the room, not hurrying, not performing, just walking with a small bundle of letters in her hand, the kind of walking that was quiet and certain, and had decided where it was going before it started. She stopped at the edge of the circle. She placed the letters on the table beside the governor. She did not look at Eugenia. She looked at the governor and then at the judge, and she said in a voice that was flat and clear and entirely composed, "These are letters between Eugenia Ashwood and my father, Edmund Haig. They document her instruction to the legal team to draft the liability provision in his distribution contract in language specifically designed not to be apparent on first review. The dates run from 3 months before the contract was signed to 2 weeks after the liability clause activated." She paused. "My father died in March believing he had been careless," she said. "He was not careless. He was deliberately misled. I believe the governor's office and the relevant courts would find this documentation useful. She stepped back. She still had not looked at Eugenia. Eugenia looked at her. For one moment, one visible, uncalculated moment, something crossed Eugenia Ashwood's face that was not control. That was not the face she wore in rooms where things were going her way, or rooms where things were going badly, but she had planned for it. This was the face of a woman who had genuinely not expected the blow to come from that direction. She recovered. Of course she recovered. She had decades of practice, but the moment had happened, and the room had seen it. The governor picked up the letters. He looked at them with the unhurried eyes of a man who was no longer pretending that this evening was what it had been announced as. "Mrs. Ashwood," he said, "I think we should speak privately. My office will be in contact in the morning." Eugenia said, "I think there has been a misunderstanding. My office," he said, "will be in contact in the morning." He was a man who had learned to say things once. She heard it. She inclined her head. A small, precise movement. The movement of a woman who was retreating in the only direction that preserved anything, and who was already planning what came next. She turned and walked back into the room. The crowd parted for her. Not in triumph in the way crowds parted for something they were not sure they wanted to be near. The lawyer with the leather folder had already disappeared. Imogen stood in the space where the circle had been and breathed. Fletcher appeared beside her. He did not say anything. He stood there, standing still, which was what she had asked him to do, and had kept doing it even when it was very hard, which she had not been certain he could manage. She looked at him sideways. "You didn't step in," she said. "I was very close a few times," he said. "But you didn't." "But I didn't." He paused. "The subsection C thing. Did you—" "Yesterday afternoon, third reading." He was quiet. "I had read that will," he said slowly. "Twice. I did not see subsection C." "You were reading it like a target," she said, "looking for the danger. I read it like a map, looking for the roots." He looked at her for a long moment. She looked across the room at Sylvie Haig, who was standing alone near the window with her hands at her sides and her face turned to the glass and the city lights beyond. "Excuse me," she said. She crossed the room. She stood beside Sylvie. They looked at the window for a moment. City lights, scattered, like a ground-level version of the mountain stars. "The letters," Imogen said. "That was everything." "It was his," Sylvie said. "Not mine to keep. What will you do now?" Sylvie was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she said, honest in the way she always was, flat and undecorated. "I had a plan that ended here. I haven't built what comes after yet." "That's all right," Imogen said. "I know something about building things in the middle of not knowing what comes next." Sylvie looked at her for the first time since she had walked across the room. "I still don't know if we're friends," she said. "We don't have to decide tonight," Imogen said. Something happened in Sylvie's face. Small, not quite a smile. The thing that came before a smile. In people who had forgotten they were allowed to. She turned back to the window. Imogen turned back to the room. There were 3 more conversations that needed to happen before she could leave. 2 with the governor's secretary who needed information for the formal appointment papers. One with Aldous Crane, who had returned from his conversation with Eugenia and now wanted to discuss the logging survey requirements in more detail. She noted that his tone had adjusted by several degrees. She spent 20 minutes with him and left him with a clearer picture of Colorado law and what compliance actually required, and the address at Silver Hollow, where he could send correspondence. She did not promise him what he wanted. She told him what the law required. He thanked her. Genuinely, she thought. At 10 o'clock, the reception began to thin. The governor left with his secretary. The investors drifted toward smaller conversations. The string quartet packed their instruments. The chandeliers burned on over a room that was slowly becoming ordinary. Fletcher found her putting on her coat. "The carriage is outside," he said. Good. They went out. The cold hit immediately. City cold, different from mountain cold, less clean, weighted with coal and street mud. She pulled her coat closed. He held the carriage door. She got in. He got in on the other side. They rode in silence for 2 blocks. Then he said, "I owe you an apology." She looked at the window, the city going past. "You came to Pine Ridge for strategic reasons," she said. "That is true. The apology is for not telling me that from the beginning, and the apology matters." "Yes," he said. "I am not finished being angry about it." "I know. But I understand why you made the choice you made. That is different from forgiving it. Both things can be true at the same time." He was quiet. "What I need," she said, "is for that to not happen again. If there is a thing that affects both of us, information, a plan, a problem, I need to be in the conversation when it is a conversation, not when it is already a decision." "Yes," he said. No qualification, no explanation, just yes. She looked at him. He looked back. He means it. That is something. It is not everything, and it is something. And tonight, that is enough. She looked back at the window. They rode the rest of the way in silence that was not comfortable exactly, but was real. Which was better. 3 months later, the spring came to Silver Hollow. It came first to the river which ran higher and faster and colder than it had all winter, fed by the snow melt off the peaks, and the great wheel turned with renewed urgency, the sound of it lighter and quicker than in winter, and Imogen noticed the change from the stone terrace and wrote it in the new notebook. She was on her second notebook. The first one was full. She had put it on the shelf in the company office beside the sustainable timber management text, which now had additional margin notes in 2 different handwritings. The governor's formal appointment had arrived in January. She had placed it on the desk, looked at it for a moment, placed it in the filing cabinet under A for advisory. Then she had gone back to work. There was a great deal of work. The 7 escalation contracts had been reviewed by Holden Craft, a lawyer in Denver, that she had found through a reference from the governor's secretary. Not Eugenia's lawyers, her own. Craft was 70 years old, half-retired, and had the precise mind of someone who had been reading fine print for decades, and had long since lost patience with people who put bad things in fine print. He had identified the fraudulent mechanisms in all 7 contracts inside of 4 hours, and had begun the process of restructuring them to their original terms. Rufus Dalby's debt had been reduced to $1,200 and a reasonable repayment schedule. The letter had arrived in Pine Ridge in February. Her father had written back in his careful, labored hand, I do not know what you did. I know you did it. I am very proud of you." She had read the letter 4 times. She had not put it in the notebook. Some things she was keeping in her head, not on paper. The school ran 4 days a week now, and the attendance board showed 20 children every day. Miss Pratt had submitted a request for a second teacher. Imogen had put the request through, and then found the budget space herself because she had now read every line of the company accounts and knew where the space was. The gas line extension had been completed in February. The lower mine section had the accident review done. 3 issues had been found. All 3 had been fixed before any shift went down. The accident rate in the first 2 months after the extension was 0. She was compiling a report on this for the governor's advisory board. Eugenia had not returned to Silver Hollow. The governor's office had requested her cooperation with an inquiry into the distribution contracts, including Edmund Haig's. She had provided a lawyer and refused further comment. The inquiry was ongoing. Imogen received periodic updates from Kraft and added them to the appropriate file. She did not spend much time thinking about Eugenia Ashwood. She thought about the east corner of the Dalby yard sometimes. The mineral survey was still pending. She had initiated an independent assessment after the Denver reception, using the fee Fletcher had offered her as a wedding present, which she had declined for its original purpose, but accepted for this one on the grounds that it was fair compensation for reading 4 weeks of filing cabinets at 2 in the morning. The results would come in spring. She did not know what they would say. She had made peace with not knowing. Sylvie Haig had written once, a short letter. She was in St. Louis now. She had found work. She did not say doing what. She said she thought she might come to Colorado in the summer and asked if there was anything she needed. Imogen had written back, "If you come to Colorado, come to Silver Hollow. There is always something that needs doing, and I am running out of hours in the day." She did not know if Sylvie would come. She thought she might. People who had one honest thing in common had a way of finding more. The terrace faced east. In the morning, the sun came over the ridge line and hit the stone. Floor first, and then climbed the wall and reached the windows, and the whole mountain face lit up in stages, and Imogen watched it when she had time, and sometimes when she didn't. She heard the door open behind her. Fletcher. She knew his step. She had memorized it the way she memorized things without trying, just by paying attention consistently over time. He stood beside her and looked at the valley below. The valley in spring. Green, coming back at the edges where the snow had retreated. The river full and silver. The wheel turning steady and patient. The smoke from the kitchen chimney going straight up in the still morning air. Children running between the housing blocks. Prentice at the mill door with his coffee. Holt at the gate looking up the road with the expression of a man who had seen every kind of weather and was not alarmed by any of it. "The logging survey team comes next week," Fletcher said. "I know. I scheduled them. And the governor's report is due the 15th. I'm on the second draft. And the new housing proposal for the east side. I'm waiting for the timber cost estimate from Prentice." She looked at him sideways. "Is there something you actually wanted to say, or are you going to read me my own to-do list until I invite you to sit down?" He looked at her. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "I wanted to ask you something," he said. "Ask." "Last Thursday," he said, When we were going through the water rights documentation, you crossed out what I had written and wrote 3 words, and it changed the whole reading of the clause. Right of use versus right of ownership, she said. They are not the same thing. The company has been treating them as the same thing for 20 years. I know that now. He paused. Where did you learn that? She looked at the valley. There was a law book at the county office, she said. In the public reading room. I used to go there on Saturdays when I was 15, before the library in Denver was in the budget. She paused. I read it 3 times. I had nothing else to do with Saturdays. He was quiet for a moment. What else did you read? He said, and something in his voice, when he asked it, was different from the first day at the table in her father's cabin, when he had asked her questions to assess her usefulness. This was different. This was the question of a man asking because he wanted to know, because he had realized somewhere in the last 3 months that there were a great many things he did not know about the person who had reorganized his filing system and reformed his school schedule and read his mining contracts and walked into a room in Denver in a mended green wool dress and demolished a 30-year plan in 45 minutes. And he wanted to know them, she thought. This is the part that comes after the decision. This is the part I didn't calculate, and I think I am all right with that. She opened the new notebook to a fresh page. Let me ask you something first, she said. All right? The book on the bottom shelf, she said. The sustainable logging one. Yes. The margin notes, the questions you wrote. Can this be implemented without shutting down operations? What would this cost over 3 years? She looked at him. What answers did you find? He was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down on the terrace step, and he began to talk. Not the way he had talked in Pine Ridge, not the measured, deliberate words of a man revealing calculated information to someone he needed. Just talking. The way a person talked when they had been thinking about something alone for a long time and had finally found someone who would understand why they were thinking about it. She sat down on the step beside him. She wrote. The river moved below them. The smoke from the kitchen went up straight into the still Colorado spring air. The sun finished climbing the mountain face and settled into the broad, honest light of a working day. And below them, Silver Hollow breathed, quiet and complex and real. Not a secret anymore. Not exactly. Just a place that had learned to be seen on its own terms by people who had earned the right to see it. She filled 3 pages before she stopped writing and just listened, which was something she did not do often. But she was learning that some things needed to be held in the mind before they could go on paper, and that some pages needed to stay blank a little longer, ready when they were.